Please welcome Richard Dean Anderson.
What would you do if someone offered you $30 million to come back to work? Most people would say yes without thinking twice, but Richard Dean Anderson said no, and he kept saying no. In 2013, when he was only 63 years old, he walked away from Hollywood completely. Studios were calling him. Producers were offering him huge deals. Fans were begging to see him on screen again. But he disappeared. He chose silence over stardom. And the reason why will break your heart. Richard Dean Anderson was born in January 1950 in a tiny town in British Columbia, Canada. But his parents didn't stay there long. Within 3 days of his birth, they packed everything up and moved across the border to Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's where Richard grew up, the oldest of 4 boys in a family that didn't have much money, but had tons of creativity. His dad, Stuart, was a high school teacher who taught English and drama during the day. But at night, he became someone else. He played jazz bass in local clubs, filling dark rooms with music. His mom, Jocelyn, was an artist who spent her days painting and sculpting beautiful things. Their home was always alive with color, music, and imagination. As a little kid, Richard would sneak into the back of his dad's high school theater and watch rehearsals. He remembers one time when the actors were using Twinkies as a fake birthday cake during practice. That image stuck in his young mind. He thought to himself, any job that comes with free Twinkies must be worth doing. It was innocent and funny, but it planted a seed. Maybe being on stage wasn't so bad after all. But back then, Richard wasn't dreaming about acting. He was obsessed with ice hockey. And I mean truly obsessed. He played every single day. His friends called him a hockey nut. He was so good that even Stan Mikita, a real hockey legend, said Richard had serious skills. Richard was being walked, head by professional scouts. He was 16 years old, and his dream of going pro felt so close he could almost touch it. And then everything fell apart in the worst way possible. During one violent game, Richard crashed into another player and broke his arm. It was painful, but he thought he could recover. Then just 3 weeks later, he broke his other arm. This time it was so bad that doctors had to rush him into surgery. They put pins and plates into his bones just to hold everything together. He spent 3 months in the hospital, and the doctors gave him terrible news. They said he might never get full movement back in his arms. For a kid who lived and breathed hockey, this wasn't just an injury. It was the death of his identity. He fell into a deep, dark depression. The silence of not being able to skate again hurt more than the physical pain ever could. But something unexpected started to happen during those long, lonely months in the hospital. Richard began paying more attention to his dad's drama productions. When he finally got out, he joined drama clubs at school. He even performed in plays while his arms were still in casts. Acting became his lifeline. It gave him something to hold on to when everything else had been ripped away. And slowly, a new fire started burning inside him. This fire would never go out. Money was always tight in the Anderson household. His dad's teacher salary barely covered the rent and food. Sometimes his jazz gigs helped, sometimes they didn't. All 4 boys had to work to help out. Richard delivered newspapers. He learned early on what it meant to work hard for rent, every single dollar. But even as a kid, Richard had this wild, fearless spirit that couldn't be contained. When he was only 10 years old, he decided he was going to bike from Minneapolis to Duluth. That's a 100-mile journey. He didn't tell his parents the full plan. He just got on his bike one morning and started pedaling. He made it 50 miles before his little body couldn't go any further. He had to turn back. But even though he didn't finish, he wasn't ashamed. Most adults wouldn't even try something that crazy. By the time Richard turned 17, his hunger for adventure had only grown stronger. He took off on a bicycle trip that most people would consider absolutely insane. He rode over 5,600 miles from Minnesota through Canada all the way up to Alaska. And he did the final 33 days completely alone. No car following him for safety, no backup team. Just him, his bike, and whatever weather the mountains threw at him. Earlier that same year, he had been caught in a terrifying snowstorm in New Mexico, where winds were blowing at 105 miles per hour. He could barely see 3 feet in front of him, but he survived. And somehow, that just made him want more. Richard learned to scuba dive. He bought 4 motorcycles, including a Harley-Davidson. He would jump off school roofs just for fun. He crashed dirt bikes and got right back up with a grin on his face. Once he dove off a diving board, hit his head hard, and needed stitches. It didn't slow him down one bit. One winter in Minnesota, he decided he wanted to set a world record by living in an igloo. So he built one himself and moved in. He stayed there for 3 days in freezing temperatures and nearly died from the cold. But to Richard, that was just another challenge to conquer. His teenage years were filled with broken bones, close calls, and crazy stunts. He wasn't afraid of pain. He wasn't afraid of failing. What scared him most was staying still and playing it safe. In 1976, Richard took the biggest risk of his life. He left college at Ohio University and moved to Los Angeles with nothing but a dream and a whole lot of uncertainty. To survive, he took whatever jobs he could find. One of his strangest gigs was working with whales at a marine show. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent. And it taught him something important: how to stay calm under pressure and perform in front of big audiences. Before moving to LA, he had already spent time sharpening his acting skills in New York City's tough theater scene. Every odd job, every tiny stage role was preparing him for something much bigger. Everything changed in the spring of 1976. Richard landed his first major role on the daytime soap opera General Hospital. He was cast as Dr. Jeff Weber, and he ended up staying on the show for 5 whole years. He appeared in 611 episodes. This happened right when the show was expanding from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and the timing couldn't have been better. By 1979, General Hospital had become the #1 daytime drama in all of America. Richard was riding that wave. He was acting alongside talented stars and learning everything he could. By the time he left in 1981, producers were starting to notice him. After General Hospital, Richard kept pushing forward. He appeared on The Facts of Life, Today's FBI, and even The Love Boat. These weren't just random guest spots. Richard was carefully choosing roles that showed he could do more than just soap operas. He wanted to prove his range. But not everything worked out. Between 1982 and 1984, he was given leading roles in 2 different CBS shows. Both shows got canceled after just 1 season. For any actor trying to make it big, that kind of back-to-back fail can destroy a career. But Richard didn't give up. He watched. He learned. He paid attention to what audiences actually wanted to see. Then in 1985, everything changed forever. Richard auditioned for a new show called MacGyver. And something really interesting happened. He showed up to the audition wearing his glasses. He didn't try to look cool or hide who he really was. That honest, real moment impressed the producers. They weren't looking for a typical tough guy action star. They wanted someone audiences could relate to. Richard got the part. Even though he had no formal stunt training, he convinced them to let him do most of his own stunts. 70% of the dangerous scenes you saw on screen, that was actually him doing it. He believed in doing things himself. And here's something really important. Richard hated guns in real life. And so did his character MacGyver. That perfect match made the show feel authentic. MacGyver exploded into a cultural phenomenon. From 1985 to 1992, the show aired 139 episodes. Richard went from being a soap opera actor to a television legend. By 1990, he was earning $1 million per season. But the real money came when he negotiated producer credits in the later seasons. That meant he was earning money from reruns, too. MacGyver was everywhere. Parents loved the show because it was smart and didn't glorify violence. Kids loved it because it made science and problem-solving look incredibly cool. The word MacGyver actually became a verb in everyday language. When you fix something creatively, you MacGyvered it. Even 14 years after the show ended, Richard brought the character back for a Super Bowl commercial. That's how deeply MacGyver had sunk into American culture. But all that success came with a terrible price. In 1987, While filming a simple running scene, Richard stepped into a hidden hole in the ground. His back disc exploded. The pain was so intense it shot down his entire leg. He couldn't walk properly, but Richard refused. To stop. For a year and a half, he kept filming episodes while dealing with horrible pain. He swallowed painkillers and refused to let stunt doubles take over. He didn't want anyone to think he was weak, but the damage was very real. Doctors warned him he might have permanent nerve problems. He finally agreed to have surgery, but the pain never completely went away. He carried that injury with him for the rest of the show's run. By 1991, the pressure had become too much. Richard collapsed on set. He literally fainted from stress, dehydration, and total exhaustion. When doctors examined him, they said his body was only functioning at 20% capacity. He was completely burned out. Richard went to the studio bosses and asked them to let him leave the show. They said no. In fact, they told him if he quit, they would sue him for $18 million. That wasn't a bluff or an empty threat. Richard was trapped. He was forced to keep filming even though his health was falling apart. Years later, he admitted that MacGyver had completely taken over his entire life. There was nothing left outside of that show. No hobbies, no peace, no freedom. Just work, work, and more work. When Richard agreed to star in Stargate SG-1 in 1997, he shocked everyone at the studio by making a demand that no actor had ever made before. He didn't want a full-time schedule. He demanded a 3-day work week. That meant Friday through Sunday would be completely off limits. He wanted those days to be home with his newborn daughter, Wiley. The producers at MGM thought he was crazy. How could they possibly rearrange an entire show's filming schedule around one actor? But Richard was coming off the massive success of MacGyver. His name alone could bring in millions of viewers. So the studio gave in. They gave him the deal. Richard ended up earning $100,000 per episode while only working part-time. And somehow, that part-time schedule lasted all 10 seasons. He appeared in 173 episodes out of 214 total. That 3-day contract became legendary in Hollywood. Other actors started asking for similar deals, but nobody else managed to pull it off quite like Richard did. By 2001, during the show's 5th season, things got even more incredible. Richard's pay had doubled. He was now earning $200,000 per episode. That worked out to $4.4 million per season, and he was still only working 3 days a week. Stargate SG-1 had become the Sci-Fi Channel's biggest hit, pulling in about 2.5 million viewers every single week. The show was making over $100 million from international deals. Fan conventions would pay Richard up to $50,000 just to appear and answer questions. And fans absolutely loved him, especially because so many of his character's sarcastic one-liners weren't even in the script. Richard just made them up on the spot. But in 2004, something happened that changed everything. While filming Season 8, Richard injured his knee during what should have been a simple running scene. His foot landed wrong, his knee twisted, the ligaments tore. The pain was instant and severe. He needed surgery and months of physical therapy. Doctors told him straight up that if he kept doing physical scenes, he could lose his ability to walk properly. Instead of writing Richard off the show, the producers made a clever change. They promoted his character from colonel to general, which meant he would mostly be sitting behind a desk. His action scenes were cut down by more than half. Fans noticed he wasn't as active anymore, but they didn't know the real reason why. The truth didn't come out until years later. Even today, Richard still walks with a slight limp. That injury was a major turning point. He never took another physically demanding role again. Behind the scenes, Richard was struggling in ways most fans never knew about. In 2001, the same year he won a Saturn Award for Best Actor, he was secretly dealing with severe burnout. His 3-day work week might have sounded easy, but each of those days started at 5 in the morning and didn't end until 7 at night. There were no breaks. The pressure was crushing. He told his co-star that it was destroying his health. He couldn't sleep without taking pills. He was drinking 8 to 10 cups of coffee every day just to stay awake. During his award speech, fans saw a happy, cheerful actor. But backstage, makeup artists had to cover up the dark circles under his eyes. He was meeting with a therapist twice a week and was seriously thinking about quitting after season 7. The breaking point came when he literally fell asleep during a live interview. That's when the studio finally stepped in. They hired him a personal assistant and cut his publicity work in half. Richard had never been the kind of guy who settled down, but in 1996, everything changed when he met a woman named April Prowse. She was a wardrobe stylist, not a celebrity. A mutual friend introduced them, and April didn't expect much. She thought Richard was just another actor who would never commit to anyone. But after just one date, April called her mother and said she had met the man she was going to spend her life with. They stayed together for 7 years. On August 2nd, 1998, their daughter Wiley was born. Richard was 48 years old. He had never been married, but now he was a father. And that changed absolutely everything. Wiley's birth was terrifying. When she came out, she didn't breathe. She didn't cry. Doctors rushed to save her life while Richard stood frozen, trying to stay strong. When they finally said she was okay, Richard broke down and cried. He later said it was the most overwhelming moment of his entire life. From that day forward, everything revolved around his daughter. Even though Richard and April eventually separated in 2003, there was no anger or bitterness. Richard became a full-time single father, and he didn't complain about it for 1 second. He embraced it completely. Richard took over all the parenting duties: diapers, feedings, school drop-offs, everything. Even in his late 60s, he was still driving Wiley to school every morning and picking her up every afternoon. He gave up acting. He chose quiet days on his Malibu farm over movie sets and scripts. He said that even waking up at 3 in the morning to check on his daughter was never a burden. Richard admitted that becoming a father at 48 hit him harder than he ever expected. During Wiley's first year, he cried almost every single day. When April first told him she was pregnant, he tried to stay calm, but soon he was reading every parenting book he could find. He even joined yoga classes to prepare for the delivery. He couldn't stop staring at his baby girl. The man who had once been called Hollywood's most desirable bachelor had become a man who stayed home, ignored phone calls, and just held his child. In 2013, Richard made a decision that shocked everyone in the entertainment industry. He quit. He walked away completely. At 63 years old, with Stargate behind him and MacGyver long over, he decided he would no longer chase scripts or paychecks. His daughter was now 15, and he didn't want to miss a single moment of her teenage years. His body was tired and worn out from decades of St. Yance. But more than that, he didn't want to repeat the mistakes of his past. People he had dated before told him he was never home. He didn't want his daughter to ever feel that way. Between 2013 and 2025, Richard turned down more than $23 million in offers. Netflix offered him $15 million for a documentary about his life. He said no. He didn't want his life turned into content for people to consume. Disney offered $5 million for him to appear in 5 Stargate episodes. Paramount offered $3 million for a single MacGyver reboot episode. Richard didn't even bother replying to most of these offers. One news outlet wrote that no actor in Hollywood history has turned down more money, more offers, and more fame than Richard Dean Anderson. And yet, he has no regrets. When the MacGyver reboot came out, Richard said it wasn't true to what the original show really stood for. He wasn't interested in fake nostalgia or empty money grabs. In May 2025, at a fan convention in London, Richard shocked everyone again. He didn't talk about fame or his glory days. Instead, he called Hollywood a soul-killing machine. He said the industry no longer cared about people, only profits. Fans were stunned. Richard had always been polite and charming in public appearances, but this time, he didn't hold anything back. He spoke from the heart. He wasn't selling stardom anymore. He was telling the truth about what that world had cost him. People in the audience cried. They realized they were witnessing something rare, a man who had walked away from everything and found peace on the other side. Today, at 75 years old, Richard lives a quiet life in Malibu, California. He has an estimated net worth of $30 million, His home is worth about $9.5 million, and he pays over $100,000 a year in property taxes. But Richard isn't focused on luxury or showing off his wealth. He works with environmental groups. He serves on the board of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society and helps fight illegal whaling operations. He supports youth programs. He only attends about 3 fan events per year, and he does it because he genuinely cares about the people who loved his work, not because he needs the money. Richard didn't retire to escape or hide. He retired to be present. He chose silence over noise. He chose real life over the spotlight. And above all, he chose to be a father over being famous. His story isn't about a man who gave up. It's about a man who figured out what truly mattered before it was too late. It's about a man who said no to millions of dollars because no amount of money could buy back the time he wanted to spend with his daughter. It's about a man who survived the Hollywood machine and came out on the other side with his soul intact. So the next time you wonder why you don't see Richard Dean Anderson on your TV screen anymore, remember this: he's not lost. He's not forgotten. He's not broken. He's exactly where he wants to be. He's home. And that's the most powerful choice any person can make. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And subscribe to our channel because we bring you real stories about real people who made real choices. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.